Sunder is dead. All hail Bracer. Well, not quite. But quite a few things have changed since the last patch regarding Sunder and especially Bracer of Undoing, and that's what we will talk about here. Sunder was nerfed heavily in multiple regards. The base damage, the true damage, was reduced, the scaling of the true damage was reduced, and the damage increase was reduced as well, and the upgraded version got an increased cooldown on top of that. So all in all, there's less of a reason to pick up Sunder. Sunder is still being used, especially on casual levels, but even in competitive, it is nice to take down a specific target, isolate a target, hit it with the Sunder, and deal more damage as the entire team. It still has that tank shredding potential more or less, but it loses especially a lot of the early aggression potential that it had before. At the same time, Bracer got buffed. Now Bracer got some very interesting changes. When we look at the old Bracer, it healed 50% of your health and returned 50% of the mana lost in the last 3 seconds on a 120 second cooldown. You could upgrade that to a upgraded version of the item with a 5-second return on the health and mana. This is very interesting. If you look at these numbers, what you'll notice first are the 3 seconds on the first stage. 3 seconds is not a lot. If you think about it, for example, if you were to be hit by one ability and then by another one within 2 seconds, but then you would get CC'd after, then after the CC you might already be in a stage where you will not get healed for that first ability anymore. Likewise, you kinda wanna juke some of the enemy's damage, so it's not ideal to take a lot of damage in a short time, because realistically you don't want to take the damage in the first place, and often the damage will be split over a longer time. Obviously there are exceptions, especially big ultimates like Poseidon Kraken or Isis ultimate, but often enough those ultimates are used in a moment where they will already kill you, so you can't use Bracer afterwards anymore and you would have been better off with Aegis in the first place. As such, Bracer was kind of an interesting hybrid solution between healing up a little bit of damage that you took and also getting a bit of your cooldowns back, because obviously the 3-second cooldown reaction is already on the item. But as I said, it was often impractical to use. Even if you were hit by a big ultimate like a Poseidon Kraken, if you were CC'd after for just a little bit too long, you couldn't do anything anyways. The upgrade made that a little better, because instead of having 3 seconds, you had 5 seconds of returning health and mana. This overall is pretty nice, as 5 seconds gives you much more room. You can't really be CC'd for 5 seconds most of the time, and therefore you're most likely gonna be able to use the relic as long as you're still alive. The problem here was that this was literally just on the upgraded version and you had to get there first, and typically you don't want to spend $500 relic too early on. Mostly you finish your relic after you finish the rest of your build, as often enough you will get better stats overall out of another item. Sure, there were exceptions like old Sunder, but Bracer of Undoing was just not potent enough for it to be reasonable to upgrade it early. Then patch 4.10 hit. Bracer of Undoing itself, the base version, got an update, a buff, that gave it the 5 seconds of the upgraded version instead of the 3 seconds that the base version had previously. So now, from the start, when buying this item, you would have 5 seconds of getting your health and mana back. The upgraded version also got some additional buffs, because obviously otherwise it would have just been the same as the base version now. The cooldown for the upgraded version was decreased from 120 seconds to 100 seconds, and the health and mana restoration was increased from 50% to 60%. Individually, these numbers don't sound too crazy. It's more the combination of everything that makes Bracer a lot more potent, especially the first stage that now has a lot more viability. You may have seen that the item is picked up a lot more in the SPL as well. We see like 2 to 3 roughly per game, depending on what the matchups are, which really shows that this item is valued more than before. It's not in the same place as Sunder was beforehand. Sunder was just picked up by almost everyone, but you will see it across 3 roles, usually support or solo or the jungler. Obviously, exceptions exist, but those roles benefit the most, as they can generally afford to build a little more tanky, especially solo and support, or they are able to make more use of the cooldown reduction and have more means of getting out, while potentially also being a little more tanky. Think of any assassin that is building Shifter's Shield, having some more survivability, maybe a Spirit Orb later in the build, as well as having multiple movement abilities like, for example, Serket or Susanoo or whichever god you want to think of. Those really benefit from additional cooldown for defensive plays to get out, but also for aggressive plays where they can use their damaging abilities again and their abilities deal a lot of damage. Mid laners and ADCs typically still want to stick to the more traditional relics as they did before, even when Sunder meta was in its highest peak, as Beats and Aegis are often too valuable to let go of them. You just need to be free of that CC as an ADC quite often or as a mid laner, because otherwise you're dead before you can even do anything, as you can't soak up as much damage and you don't have the same means of getting out of a fight. And likewise, sometimes you just need that Aegis to not get blown up in the first place. Bracer of Undoing is also especially effective against Sunder, which is kind of ironic seeing that that was the last meta. If you look at the duration of Sunder, it's exactly 5 seconds. And if you now survive the Sunder just until the last second, you can just use your Bracer and undo 50 to 60% of the damage that you took, which is gonna be less than before because Sunder is also nerfed. So in a way, this is a direct counter item, which also has some different capabilities. Now, assuming that Bracer stays as popular as it is at the moment, is that a good meta? If Bracer was suddenly super popular and everyone would pick it up, would that be a good meta? Here are some thoughts that I have on that. Obviously, feel free to disagree here. Everyone has their own opinion on these kind of things. But there's something about Bracer that I like, which I think other items don't really offer in the same way. It has an offensive and a defensive use, but the offensive use in most cases is not too strong. Obviously, 3 seconds cooldown reduction on the right character can be very potent. Think, for example, Willish, think Herbois, think Fenrir. They all can make very good use of that. And those double ability chains where you can go through your whole kit or at least one ability twice definitely hurt. But it's more of an outlier case here. Most guards will just get some cooldown of their abilities, which allows them to chase down an enemy or use that escape that you need in that moment, if you're lucky and if the cooldown has already ran relatively low, which also usually means that the ability has been used so much earlier that you don't get the mana back, unless the ability is not off cooldown right after. In regards to its defensive use, it's in my opinion a little less bullshitty than a Beats or Aegis. It is a defensive item and we are in a meta that favors defensive items again now apparently, but I am more okay with Bracer than I ever was with Beats or Aegis. And that's for quite a few reasons. First of all, if we look at Beats, Beats is something that can be used at any point. If you made a mistake, you can still use your Beats to get out. You can be already under CC unless it's a knockup, this is an exception case, and you can still get rid of it instead of having to use it preemptively. So using Beats in a way is relatively brainless. Sometimes you want to preemptively use it before you get pulled by something, for example a Susano, and you have to time that right, but in many situations you can just get away with using it after the CC was applied. Aegis, on the other hand, is something you have to use preemptively, but it also allows for so much. We used to have an Aegis that actually kept you in place instead of allowing you to move around, where you had to be a lot more careful that you don't get blown up after you use your Aegis. But now, if you see a Poseidon Kraken, you just click your Aegis and you're fine. As long as the ability has some sort of wind-up, some sort of warning to it, it's very, very easy to avoid damage entirely. And avoiding damage entirely is something that other games don't really favor that much. For example, in League of Legends, for the longest time, you had to buy a full item, price-wise somewhat comparable to Rod of Tahuti, to get damage immunity, and you could only get it as a mage or a character that at least benefits from magical damage somehow. Giving this out for free is basically tied to Smite's high burst potential compared to other MOBAs. And likewise, the beats are tied to the high CC potential in Smite, which other games don't have to the same extent either. Bracer is different. Bracer requires you to play a little bit smarter. Obviously, it's something you do after taking damage, so it's not like you have to preemptively use it, but you have to know exactly when you use it. If you time it wrong, you will not get the full heal if the 5 seconds are over too quickly, and if you use it too early, you may just not get the full benefit out of it as if you took some more damage, so you really have to time it right. You also cannot use it under CC, so you have to be careful of that. You can't just go in and hope for your Bracer to work at the right moment, because if you're CC'd, you might just die anyways. Timing it right with the cooldown reduction takes actual skill. If you want to get the most ideal use of it, then you have to use your abilities in a proper order, in the proper situation and everything, and that's very important for it to get its full effectiveness, and that's nothing that you would just have all the time. And last but not least, it can actually be countered. If somebody used Beats, if somebody used Aegis, it's too late. That relic cannot be countered anymore at that point. Bracer can. There is anti-heal. If you get anti-heal, Bracer will heal less. Simple as that. They still get the full mana, but really, Bracer's not about the mana for most people. Being able to counter an effective relic very effectively with the right item choices, in my opinion, is great. It just requires you to think ahead and get the right items. Obviously, it's a bit annoying that you get forced into something just for self-heal. This is the same reason why I'm always a bit annoyed with, for example, Hercules and Tyr. You just need to get anti-heal for these particular gods because of their self-heal. It's a bit frustrating if you see that, but with Bracer generally being popular, it's not wrong to pick up these items anyways. And anti-heal items are at the moment in a very good place. They have been buffed and price adjusted, so it's very much effective to get them and they fit very well into builds. Especially Brawler Speedstick, but also Divine Ruin and Pestilence all work in that way. And if you only have 2 of them, the heal is already drastically decreased, so much less of a problem. Let me know in the comments down below how you feel about Bracer, if you prefer a Bracer meta or a Sunder meta or whatever in between. It would be really interesting to see how people generally see this. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you're not subscribed yet, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell. It really helps me out. And I'm also doing a $100 giveaway for Into the AM at the moment, so if you want to check that out and maybe get some Smite merch or some other merch, links down below in the comment section. See you guys for the next one tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.